Well, it's a great pleasure now to be joined by Daniel Geltrude, business analyst and economist. Daniel, if you could just take a look at the state of the world economy right now, what's your sense? There seems to be a growing feeling that inflation could be persistent. Recession may well be something that we are thinking about, so stagflation could be there. There seems to be a reasonable amount of pessimism around. How do you see the situation?
Well, it's very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen in terms of will a recession hit. So what we need to do is look at the trends. That's what's important right now. And when we look at the trends and we see rising interest rates and we see inflation that remains stubborn, we see a job market in the United States which is starting to cool down. We see savings which had built up during the pandemic now dwindling, and we see household debt beginning to grow. These are signs of recession in the future. So I think we have to take a step back and say there are some serious concerns here, and what could be done from a policy standpoint to try to head this off.
So, if you look at it from the point of view of somebody, economics layperson listening to this conversation, the two are almost different things. Inflation means overheating. You need to raise interest rates to try and control inflation, which is price rise, which is obviously politically sensitive. Recession, on the other hand, means that there's no economic activity. Traditionally, you should have them, at other ends, each at different ends of the spectrum. But what you're saying is they could be coming together, which is stagflation, in other words. So in high prices are rising, but yet there's unemployment and yet economic activity is going down. Worst of both worlds.
Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about, is a stagflation situation, which, as you just said, that's the worst from both sides. So this is a dire economic scenario that you just don't want to be in. But if we look at what's happening around you, because interest rates are rising, you see money coming out of the stock market and therefore the stock market coming down in value. We see strikes looming in the United States, which is going to put pressure on employers to have to pay more. We see student debt bills now becoming due. Spikes in oil prices, and overall there's a global slump economically. So again, I don't want to be somebody who is all negative, but the facts are the facts here. And this is all something that we need to be very cognizant of what could happen.
So in other words, it's almost a reversal of the situation that we were seeing a few years ago, where growth was proceeding okay and inflation was down and interest rates were down, which meant that economic activity could happen. The problem with this situation is that the authorities don't quite know what to do, because if they keep interest rates high, it will help with the inflation, but it makes the recession worse. And if you do it the other way around, then inflation persists.
That's true. So you have to look at it this way. The approach that's been taken right now in terms of supply and demand, which will be the cause of inflation. So we've had high demand and not enough supply. So the approach has been, let's try to bring down demand. Therefore, we can put supply and demand in balance and get inflation under control. So because tampering down demand doesn't seem to be working as effectively as they thought, how about not paying as much attention to the demand side and doing everything possible to lift the supply side? Because no matter when this comes in balance, it doesn't matter where it is. So I have always been a proponent of the supply side of economics. I would have approached this a little bit differently and focused exclusively on supply, because if you can solve the problem that way, we don't have a lot of these issues which are now flaring up.
But some of the supply side issues are also linked to global factors that may not be in anybody's control, right? The war between, Russia and Ukraine, or whatever's happening in China, with China becoming a rogue actor in this entire philosophy. So those are problems that are not in anyone's control, and who knows when those will be solved.
Well, they weren't in control in the past, right? So you're right in saying, look, domestic and international events can occur that could be out of your control. But what I would hope that the United States has learned is you cannot have a single basis for your supply. Those supply chains need to be spread out domestically and internationally, so that you are not tied into, let's say, one area, which in the United States' case, in many ways, it was linked to China. And China is not necessarily a friend of the United States. So you have to look at that and say, look, we need to be able to get our supplies from many places around the world. And I think we're starting to see that change, specifically related to India. I think more supply chains are opening up for the United States through India.
Do you think that shift to countries like India is something that is going to become irreversible? It's not that the US and India don't disagree on some issues, they do, but there seems to be a growing feeling that a certain section and a large section of the supply chains do need to move to a country like India, which will, of course, be a big thing for the India story.
Oh, absolutely. Look, the issue here is to have countries that are doing business together be aligned economically, working together for mutual benefit, as opposed to each side trying to outdo the other. And I think that's what we're seeing with the United States and China. I think that there is a friendlier environment and relationship between the United States and India, which can be mutually beneficial. Look, India has a lot of production potential. The United States has a huge appetite for products. These things go together quite well. So yes, I do see a lot more international trade between the United States and India into the future.
And when you're looking at that supply side issues which we were just referring to, how in your view, does India compare to, let's say, a Vietnam or a Mexico, which is closer to the US, or other countries in Southeast Asia? India much larger, of course.
Well, listen, that's the point. India has so much more potential because the amount of population and the amount of production that there's the potential for it gives India the advantage. But of course, you also have to look at the pricing aspect and the quality. And I believe that if India puts itself in a position to be very competitive in the price and the quality of the goods that they're supplying, there's no reason why they would not be able to outperform other countries in Asia.
All right, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. And let's hope that happens, because I think India has been able to solve some of the issues around logistics and infrastructure and digital. So those used to be problems that have been sorted out. What, to your mind, would be some of the issues that you think companies and others in America would still be worrying about when it comes to India? Well, too far away, other issues, policy flip-flops, what would be the concern areas?
Well, look, anytime you're dealing with the international situation, there's a lot of unknowns, right? Because civil unrest, wars, and other things can crop up. I think it's a matter of American companies developing a trust in the stability of India's economy, its workforce, and its government. And I think Prime Minister Modi has really tried to focus in on this area in terms of growing that relationship and putting forth a message to say, listen, you can trust that India literally will deliver on its promises. And I think as that proves out more and more over time, the relationship between U.S. companies and U.S. consumers and India will have to grow. All
right, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us with that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.